Good day, Patriots. It's Drew here with Connor Tomlinson, our friend from Britain, and we're going to be discussing what is happening in Britain right now. We're going to be discussing the terrible state of British politics right now. We'll be discussing how bad things have become. What we don't want Australia to become like that. This is a big thing in my sort of shift towards more conservative values. I look at what's happening in Britain, and it's just such an overwhelming disaster, and we have to stop that from happening. Like, there's just the pure sectarianism we see there. So Connor is in Australia right now, in Brisbane.
Yeah, first time, and I thought I would. I mean, first of all, your home's really nice. So
thank you, man. Thank you.
But I thought we'd actually, partake in some authentic Australian culture by leaving the convention centre where I was getting vitamin D deficiency. So cheers.
Yeah, no, thank you, man. So Connor is here for CPAC. And he's just at the convention center, and I picked him up, and afterwards I'll try and get him a good local feed. But it's good to have you here, Connor. So what are your impressions of Australian politics, what you've been seeing recently? I know you're planning on speaking a bit about Fatima payment and stuff like that in your speech later today. I think we've got somewhat similar problems. I think we're on similar trajectories in some ways.
I think you guys are maybe about 5 years behind us. And that's because a few years ago we had, other than the fact that we had the Conservatives in power and they had a revolving door of leaders who, bar one, and she was only in for 40 days, didn't get it and made problems worse. You guys have a total leadership vacuum. I've been trying to ask a bunch of politicians and the like. I spoke to a senator earlier today, but I can't remember her name for the life of me.
Jacinta Price, maybe?
No, I know Jacinta. Blonde woman. She's currently solid. But she's in the opposition at the moment. Infrastructure minister. Yeah. But I was asking her this, and they were just saying, like, the Liberals and the Conservatives don't really want to be in coalition together. There's a big divide in that party. Yeah, and the Liberals, I mean, Peter Dutton was frankly an embarrassment at the last election. He could have walked away with it, but instead he chose to prostrate himself before a Hindu temple and promised more Indian school funds.
It is very interesting because the Liberals make such a big play for the Indian vote and migrant votes, but they were the stat that Costas actually said on the Drew Pavlich show was 85% voted for Labour.
Yeah, and this is what Jacinta pointed out, and now she's been banished to the backbenches.
Yeah,
so, I feel like printing her and Pauline Hanson a "Right Too Soon" T-shirt.
You know what's really funny? So that Costas statistic, he came on the Drew Pavlich show, which we're on right now, and we just had a debate about migration, and he just had that like nonchalantly. He just nonchalantly was like, "Oh yeah, it's 85%." And then was like, can you say that again? That's a really crazy stat. And then it went immediately viral because I think Jordan Knight shared it. And Jacinta Price saw that, started talking about it, and then the Liberal Party literally erupted into a civil war. And it was so funny that it just randomly, Cost just said it as an aside, like,
you won't be able to recover your political dire straits if you keep treating your politicians like that. Yeah. And that's why I think you guys are like 5 years behind us. Like we have reform as a party, as a sort of insurgent populist movement, and they're literally polling as the number one right now. Yeah, they're on about 35% quite consistently. Pretty much most people thought that reform ceiling was about 20%, and they would have to go into coalition with Conservatives. The Conservatives are going extinct. They're selling furniture in the Carlton Club like firewood. Crazy. Kemi Badenoch's cratering. She'll be replaced by Robert Jenrick by May, and then you'll get sort of mutual reinforcing arms race.
Do you think Jenrick can turn things around for the Tories? Would the Tories be worth saving if Jenrick came in?
Okay, two different questions. Would they be worth saving? I think people are interested in saving them just because they like the brand identity.
And the aesthetics. I mean, it's the oldest, most successful party in the English-speaking world.
Yeah, and successful in terms of winning elections.
Yeah, true. I agree with you.
They like the members' clubs in London. They like the architecture. They like being car-carrying party. However, it's been morally hollowed out, and the identity of Tory has been contaminated in most constituencies around the country. Like, you're never winning the red wall back. There are certain constituencies where, because you've liberalised the Tory so much, they're just going to defect to the Lib Dems anyway. Yeah. So I don't think they come back within an election cycle. The best they can hope for is to be a junior partner in a coalition with Reform. But at the moment, that's probably not possible. You're going to see more defections from the Conservatives to Reform, and the best they can hope for is actually being a strong shadow cabinet for the next 4 years and pressuring Labour, boosting the profile of certain shadow ministers like Nick Timothy, Robert Jenrick, who knows where Rupert Lowe's going to end up.
Yeah.
And then being in a arms race with reform to force reform's hand. Because reform's instincts are to liberalize and soften, unless they're pressure. So the reason that Nigel Farage didn't denounce Elon Musk and Tommy Robinson when they did that rally is because he realized, oh, that's about 1 million people. That's a quarter of my voters from the last election.
That was actually a stunning turnout. 1 million people. It's so funny that the media and the police were saying it's 100,000. It was so clearly 1 million people.
It's absurd to say that it was anything less than like 800,000. So we
probably the biggest nationalist demonstration in any Western country in how long? I don't know.
Yeah, probably. I mean, it's certainly the largest protest in Britain since the Iraq War protests.
Yeah.
So it's been about 20 years. And because it wasn't anti anything necessarily, it's actually hard to get people to turn out for that, especially considering that the flagship leader, being Tommy Robinson, is such a bogeyman.
For sure.
To have 1 million people come out is quite impressive. But so with external pressure, reform can be made to be the kind of party that its voters already expect it to be. Because if you poll reform members, 99% of them were saying we want mass deportations back when Farage was denouncing them before he caught up. So if Robert Jenrick's reformed Tory party, pardon pun, can force their hand and they can say, well, we're going to do net emigration. Well, we're going to do mass deportations of all Islamists. Well, we're going to do remigration. Like, if they can do that by the time it gets to 4 years, they'll have the policies on the books and they'll have the mandate. And I think they need to, because we've only got about 4 years to fix this, because the demographic situation in the UK is so dire.
What is the actual demographic situation right now? Because is it hovering around 70%? I know in London, for example, like native English people in London, it's like 20% or 25%.
It's about crazy. Because in 2021, the census, and this was before the Boris wave of like 1 million third worlders.
Thank God.
English people were only a third of the majority of their great cities like London, Leicester, Luton, Bradford, Birmingham, so it's in decline from then. I live in the one English alcove in London, where we're still under siege because of the transport network. As far as the demographic situation, officially the population is about 68 million. It's definitely a lot more than that.
I read somewhere that the SIM cards operating in Britain is like 82 million.
Same with the sewage, same with the supermarkets saying how many they're servicing. It's something like 80 million. We've got at least 2 million illegal migrants, because in 2017, they estimated it was 1.2 million illegal visa overstays. Ever since then, we've had 200,000 detected crossing in boats, a bunch more in lorries, and then obviously more visa overstays, because they stopped checking it after 1997. Like, Blair abolished exit checks because he was just like, oh, I guess they're just going to all leave as like ramp up migration. So we've got millions of illegals. Also, I've got friends that run sort of data analytics who understand stuff a little better than I do. They have said that because in the last census there are lots of people who don't speak English, they didn't answer it. It's the same with how Muslim households can exploit postal voting, just in the inverse. There was one area of, I think it was West London, where there was like a 30% trans population, and people were like, what? That's impossible.
30%.
And it's because the Muslim households didn't understand the sex and gender question, because they didn't speak English. So people sort of stumble upon an area where all of the census data is just fraudulent. So there's probably a massive amount of people in the country that we just don't register.
80 million is crazy. If it's like literally 12 million above. We were actually looking at census data in Australia, the last census in 2021. And even then, you had really incredible statistics, like almost like a majority of Australians have at least like one parent born outside the country, which is a crazy statistic. And that was in 2021. And we've had essentially a Boris wave since then. It's really funny because I remember in British politics, people would talk about, oh, we want the Australian-based system where you have skills-based, points-based. It's not like that at all. There was actually a recent study by Australian National University, ANU, that just 12% of new migrants arriving in Australia from offshore are skilled migrants.
Yeah, we have less than 5%. So 95% of our visas every year go to non-net taxpayers. The other 5% are estimated likely. Every single person that is not a net taxpayer costs at least £465,000 by the age of retirement. If they reach the age of 80, it's something like 600,000.
That's like 800,000 Australian dollars. That's a massive amount.
And that's about 1 million people every single year, predominantly from the third world, because after Brexit was passed through, they removed caps on student and worker visas. They went against the advice of even the Pro-Migration Migration Advisory Committee, Quango, and they said, we're going to have health and social care visas, and we're going to have dependent visas for health and social care workers. So they're already paid by the taxpayer. The dependents don't have to work. So that led to Nigerians being outnumbered 2-1, Ghanaians outnumbered 4-1, and Zimbabweans, RIP Rhodesia, 10-1 in terms of their dependents. So for every healthcare worker, they bring over 10 family members. And then
that's crazy.
They gave out 70,000 healthcare visas, but it only filled 17,000 vacancies. So they took the visa and then just disappeared into the system.
Wow.
And went like straight on welfare or went and did a delivery job or something.
There was a study that showed that I think parent reunion visas in Australia, the average parent will cost the taxpayer net like 400,000 Australian dollars, and that was like 10 years old. That statistic, including inflation, it's probably now like 600,000 or something like that. And a lot of our migration is basically parent reunion visas, family reunion visas. So like, I wish we could do, Denmark is probably the gold standard for this, where they actually did those proper studies where they were trying to estimate, literally based on national communities.
Oh, the MENAT.
Yeah.
Graph, yes.
And even the economists saw that graph and they had to basically admit that it's a disaster. I wish we could do that in Australia. I think our statistic agencies don't want to look at stuff like that. And there was a recent thing where they actually wanted to remove a part of the census about ethnicity, I think.
Right.
Which is like really disturbing to me. Like, what's it? Let me actually find that. I think it was census.
Do you have freedom of information request functions in Australia?
We do, but it's becoming a lot harder. So this is an article by Ahmed Yusuf for ABC News.
Good Australian name.
Great stuff. The ABS won't be asking about ethnicity at the next census. Why do some experts say it's important? Beautiful stuff. Oh, that's great by Ahmed Yusuf. If you go to the ABC, they've literally got a whole section of their website called multiculturalism. I'm looking at it right now.
Meet the migrants who make this small country town fly. This is just like Radio Rwanda style.
Let me actually put one up on the screen. So Indian Australians respond to being targets of abuse after negative political.
Man, India's global reputation never recovers after giving them access to the internet. Like,
it's just. I think it's just sad that there is a lot of like racially radioactive stuff recently. Like there was one. I'll put this up on the screen too. And this was a shocking one. It was an Indian-born member of the Legislative Council in Western Australia who was saying that, in the context of who is more Australian, and she started saying that Indian migrants to Australia were technically more Australian than white Australians.
Let me explain how your country and your culture includes me.
Yeah, but the reason why was because she said there was ancient migration flows to Australia. So technically, she was saying that they were First Nations. That
is this the
and First Nations is a Canadian concept, as we know.
Yeah.
It's like sort of important.
Australian, and how do we define that? As per the DNA evidence,
Who's
more Australian, and how do we define that? As per the DNA evidence,
which is crazy. You know what's amazing? The indigenous community hates stuff like this. Like the indigenous community in Australia are really. There's been massive backlash to studies. There's a guy on Twitter called Mungo Man who does a lot of like. He talks about how like Mungo Manic, the guy on Twitter. He talks about how the ancient body Mungo Man, which was like recovered 20,000, 30,000 year old mummy, essentially that was indigenous. It was a lot of this archaeological evidence was reburied under pressure from Aboriginal lobby groups because they don't like people talking about DNA and the thesis that it's less than 60,000 years potentially because of people coming from India and stuff like that. And then she's just like, without even regard for any of that sensibility at all, she's just straight up going, no, the Aboriginals have Indian ancestry going back 4,000 years, migration from India to Australia, and therefore we are First Nations, and therefore we have a genetic, like sort of indigenous part of the country. I'm just looking at this, I'm like, does she understand how horrible that is for social cohesion in the country?
She's marketing Indians like some kind of bioweapon. Like Princess Nurgle, that literally no corner of the earth will not be touched by Indians.
Like this is like she's doing her own propaganda here. And I'm just stunned. I'm like, I don't understand why you would do that. Yeah, so
it's pure ethno-narcissism. Like, it's also like, okay, so we're all from India. Wow, how very interesting. So when are you going back?
Oh, it's just so bad. Like she was literally. So this was in response to the March for Australia stuff, where and people pointed out in the lead up to the March for Australia, there was a flyer that went around that pointed out that Indian migration to Australia just in the past 5 years was more in total than all Greeks and Italians who came to Australia over 100 years. Which is like, and obviously the Greek and Italian communities have become a substantial part of the Australian nation, stuff like that. So I think just like the volume, like in how short that time period is quite a shocking statistic. And every single major politician in the country has immediately condemned that flyer, saying it was racist for that statistic. And that this article in the ABC, which is about how Indian Australians are being attacked, that was about that article.
So hang on.
And so she's
point out the raw numbers. It's racist, despite it being celebrated because of the raw numbers.
It's really stunning, right? And the reason why she gave that speech in Parliament was she was responding to that flyer and the March for Australia stuff, saying, well, you're saying that we're not Australian, but actually we have indigenous ancestry because the indigenous people came from India originally. And if a white person were to say that indigenous people came from India originally, they would be smashed. They would be devastatingly attacked as a racist. So she doesn't even understand the sensibilities of indigenous politics in Australia.
So Yuval Noah Harari, the one pet philosopher.
Yeah.
So he went on Politics Joe, which is like a Guardian adjacent new media start. I think it's
Politics Joe. They're slop.
Absolutely rancid. He said there's no such thing as Anglo-Saxons.
I saw that the other day. Yeah.
And if you go onto the Atlantic about 2 years ago,
yeah,
or it might have been a year ago, he did an interview about reclaiming Zionism and saying that we need to champion the right of Israel to have its statehood to protect the Jewish people. And it's like, okay, you wouldn't say that because the Jewish people are a mixture of various tribes, that therefore they don't exist as people, their identity was destroyed in exile, and so they have no right to a state. So to say the same thing about the English
is ridiculous.
Is demented. It's like saying there's no such thing as a cake because there's eggs, there's flour, there's milk, there's butter. So I guess your cake just doesn't exist anymore, right? You're just eating a composite of ingredients. Therefore, we can just add, oil and fish and turds to it. Like, no thanks.
I want to bring this up because this reminds me. So there's this guy called Abel Rizvi, right? I'm so glad I found the exact tweet. So I'll put this on the screen for people. So Abel Rizvi was the head of Australia's migration program from 1995 to 2007. And he's an Indian man from, I think, of Muslim background. And we were talking, he's like a massive proponent of like basically open borders migration. And he basically does non-stop great replacement theory posting. And he was telling me that no one in the UK now worries about Normans, Anglo-Saxons, Celts, Britons because they all assimilate. And it's like, dude, that was a process of 1,000 years. That was a process of 1,000 years as a result of it. It's like, do you understand what you're doing? Like,
that's not true for multiple reasons. So number one, the Norman conquests only ever left a less than 5% genetic.
Yeah, it's a really small.
It was just a replacement of the elite governing class, and so it was a legal and cultural revolution, not a demographic revolution.
Yeah,
and demographic revolutions are by definition irreversible. Like the reason the Hungarians could bounce back from communist rule is because it was only economic and cultural replacement.
Yeah,
it was still the same people that had the same cultural memory that could revive it. So the idea that's totally BS. We for 1,000 years were 90% the same people. The only people that we had in terms of migrants in that time were the Jews, but then expelled and then brought back by Cromwell. A few thousand French Huguenots, which is basically just like getting the ferry over.
It's a really small community as well.
And they're Christians, and they literally intermarried. And per the classical model of assimilation, yes, they interbred. So unless you're going to top-down force British women and men to have relationships and children with foreigners who were never invited there in the first place, so unless you're going to do forced Islamic marriage, it's not going to happen. Like, this is not the organic desire of the people who have voted against it in every election since 1970.
Because the reality is the demographic change in Britain for the last 20 years is literally the largest rate of migration in the entire history of the British Isles.
Yeah.
Literally, like, and I make the same point with Australia too, because one of the main arguments that leftists make against like white Australians not wanting to be like demographically displaced, one of the main arguments they make is like, oh, well, you displaced the indigenous Australians, so it's stolen land, therefore you have no claim to a country. And the thing is, like, what they don't realize though is the current rate of migration just last year, I think it was like 500,000 net in Australia, which is, we've got a population of 27 million.
Yep.
So
you're adding like 2 to 3% of your population.
Yeah, exactly. And what I made this point, it's the largest rate of migration in the entire 60,000 year habitation of the Australian continent, going back even in indigenous times. Even when the British came to Australia, it was never 500,000 a year. So they complain about the displacement of indigenous peoples, and then their like response is like, let's displace them more.
Yeah.
Because there was another statistic that my friend came up with, a really smart young conservative guy called John Mainland who went to Oxford, and he said that like based on current birth rates, in about 50 years, the indigenous population of Australia will probably end up being around 10%. But based on the current rate of migration in Australia, they're going to go down to like 1%. So they're getting demographically displaced too. There's argument that like, well, you displace the indigenous Australians, so that justifies infinity further displacement forever. Why does that make sense? It doesn't make sense.
It's the same battle that Black Americans at the last election were having with their Democrat leaders who in New York and Chicago were putting up illegal migrants in hotels at their expense and giving them welfare. And they were saying, well, number one, that's for us. So, it was a war of Gibbs. But it's also the fact that, okay, there are heritage Australians, there are heritage Americans without whom their countries would not exist. They're descended from settlers. Yeah. They make up the spiritual, ideological backbone of the country. Fine. But you also have these other populations. In Australia's case, it's the indigenous Aboriginals. In America's case, it's the descendants of black slaves who, through a process of ethnogenesis or heritage, are intrinsic to the land and the nation.
I think I personally see African Americans as intrinsic to America.
Yeah, they're Americans even if they didn't participate in the founding.
It's like 400 years of history in the country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so even though there are ethnic strifes between black and white Americans, they're both still Americans, definitely identifiably culturally, to which the government owes its loyalty. So if you are importing millions of Hispanics for cheap labor purposes or to demographically gerrymander the vote in Arizona and Texas,
you're displacing them too.
You're displacing them too. Exactly. And so the same thing's happening in Australia.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? Like, and I'm at this point, one of the main ways that I got sort of excommunicated from the Liberals was I said that Mehdi Hasan is like not as American as somebody who has 400 years in the country. Because he literally, the timeline of Mehdi Hasan's amazing. 2009, he's giving a speech in London where he says non-Muslims are cattle. Then, like, literally only 5 years later, he's moving to the United States to be the head of Al Jazeera or whatever, which is like obviously Qatari, that sort of shit. And then a couple of years after that, he gets citizenship. And like, he's literally got these views where he says non-Muslims are cattle. He only ever apologized for that 10 years later when it went viral and he had to basically address it. He's got these horrible views. And people say, how dare you? You're just saying that based on race. And I was like, no, but would you tell an African American whose history goes back 400 years in the country that, you know, we're part of, you know, the history of slavery and stuff like that, would you say that Mehdi Hasan is more American than that person? I don't think you would say that I wouldn't say that to an African American at all, because they actually have been in the country for 400 years, whereas Mehdi Hasan literally arrived 10 years ago.
And also, it is so when this is why I don't like the ethnic nationalism, civic nationalism, right? Because
I think it's more ancestral than
but also cultures proceed from people, so it makes no sense to distinguish the two. And so to say Mehdi Hasan is less American than someone whose ancestors walked down the gangplank of the Mayflower or were transported during the transatlantic slave trade is true ethnically, but it's also true culturally, because if you put in Mehdi Hasan's values, faith, ideals, vision of democracy or whatever into the American system, it doesn't reproduce America. And the same thing happens with Indian migrants or the sons and daughters of the CCP that come to Australia. If you import them en masse, you don't get Australia. They're not heritage Australians. They're not the demographic that is going to reproduce Australia. Otherwise, their countries would look indistinguishable from Australia.
I think the thing is that you just can't population swap out. You can't just swap out a population and expect everything to remain constant.
Yep.
And I do think in small numbers assimilation is possible. I mean, my family came over 60 years ago to Australia, small numbers of Greeks, and we basically assimilated pretty substantially. And I had a point about this today. There was some kind of like land leftist guy who was basically saying, well,
that is a quality Twitter name. To be
honest. It was pretty funny. Ben Shapiro advisor. So he was basically saying, what was his argument? His argument was essentially that a migrant who respects the Constitution, somebody who arrived yesterday but respects the Constitution, is more American than somebody who has been in the country for ages but doesn't respect the Constitution. And I make this point. The People's Republic of China has a constitution that guarantees equality before the law, the right to vote, standing election, freedom of speech. None of it's followed. So a constitution is just a piece of paper without the wider culture. If you swap out the people, and you completely change the culture, how do you make sure that the Constitution is still a venerated document?
Yeah, and the same goes for the post-war government in Iraq or the government of Liberia. They basically copied the American Constitution. And because
it's not working.
It wasn't written on the hearts and minds of the men to whom it applied. This is de Maistre's observation that all constitutions are pre-political sentiments. And the moment they're written down on paper, it fools subsequent generations into thinking they don't need to be the custodians of their culture. They just need to abide by the Constitution. It will do the moral legwork for them. And then what happens is, because the culture has been hollowed out, successive generations of politicians see the Constitution as a set of guardrails, a kind of illegitimate set of constraints that they either reinterpret or seek to circumvent. And this is why all Americans and the Supreme Court litigation now is just squabbling over the definition of what equality is so they can like parcel out handouts that the founders never intended.
It's actually... I think Cunley Drogba has talked about this. Love his account, where it's like 130 IQ plus Anglos. Like, I love that one. Where
there's a great meme where it's like Jefferson and Adams like going back and forth. And Jefferson's right: all men are created equal, endowed by their inalienable rights. And Adams just taps him on the shoulder and goes, "Tom, don't you think we should put an asterisk to say all freeborn Christian Englishmen?" And he goes, "No, it's implied. They'll understand."
It's just it's like I think people just it's the blank slate thing. I think it's just that like. There's no conception that different cultures are different, and it just fails because I think over time you see the growing coarseness of politics in the West and stuff like that, and it's because the political community has changed a lot and the culture has changed a lot. I think again this was the one I was going to mention. Cunley Drogba had that good tweet where he was talking about the Latin American. Okay, And I had a earlier in the year when I was a bit more lefty and I was criticizing Trump, I had a thing Machiavellism, and I think the argument there essentially, where's this? He's one about, do you know that one where it's like 2050, your politics in America, if everything.
Oh yeah.
But it's like, where is it? I've got to find it and put it up.
You might have to.
Yeah, got it.
Oh,
this is a really good tweet. He's kind of making the point that like the stuff that people don't like about like say MAGA and right wing politics, like part of it is also a sort of result of like the growing Latin Americanification of American politics. Like there are guys in America who love Bukele, and that the Bukele thing is not really like something that's native to an Anglo-liberal tradition.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that the Anglo-liberal tradition, it's much more easier when you have a self-governing population. Like you wouldn't need the Lee Kuan Yew style Singapore stuff. You don't need the really harsh laws if you've got a high trust society just by virtue of it being relatively cohesive.
This was my point about the Michaela School. So when I'm going back tomorrow to the UK, and on the 23rd, I'm filming a debate with Catherine Burbelsing and Michael Gove, the steward of Boris Flave. And this was premised on an article that I wrote after there was an argument about English identity and whether or not you can learn to be English at a conference called Now in England. Yeah. And the historian Robert Toombs, who himself identified the English as a pre-political constituency to whom the land and that belongs, he then did a 180 on his own work at the conference and said, well, it was great to see little girls in headscarves singing God Save the King and reciting Rudyard Kipling because it made me believe you could learn to be English. And there's this school that is called the Michaela School, which is only 5%.
Is that the really strict headmistress?
That's the one.
Yeah.
And so I said, look.
And she basically does Lee Kuan Yew style.
Yes. And I said, this is undesirable. You don't want to turn your country into a national Michaela School because you shouldn't have reached the stage of ethnic and cultural heterogeneity and low trust in the first place to necessitate it. Like, you don't need metal detectors and silence in corridors and enforced vegetarianism to ensure that nobody is offended if you have an organic bottom-up.
It's a sad thing because, like, the Michaela School, it's obviously infinitely better than, for example, like just the complete enclaves that exist in like Bradford and stuff like that.
Yes.
Infinitely better than that. But then I get what you mean. Something is lost when you have to adopt such harsh authoritarian methods just to basically have the bare modicum of social cohesion.
You have to cosplay as the England that you have replaced, and that's not desirable. It's basically an imperial project. Like, it's the kind of institution you would have in the British Raj to break out the civil service.
Yes.
And so to inflict that standard on English people means that you're folding their culture back on them as an inferior version, and you're treating them like second-class citizens in their own country.
I forget who made that point, but it was a really good point. I saw it on Twitter. It might have been Cunliffe, might have been someone else in that sort of sphere, but he was basically saying, like, now the way that the British state interacts with like multicultural communities in Britain, it's almost like the same mindset they had in the Raj, where they had to basically balance all these competing ethnic groups to stop war.
This is in Hazoni's book, Virtue of Nationalism.
Right, yes.
And he says essentially that all empires are doomed projects because they might be able to get some riches from overseas, or they might be able to, upgrade the development of a respective nation. But in the end, all they do is they impart upon those other nations the tools by which the empire will be inflicted back on them. So this is the great irony of HMS Windrush, for example, which is basically Britain's version of the Mayflower, when in 1948, a bunch of Jamaican migrants from the Commonwealth rocked up to a coast in Essex and caused a massive migration crisis. And then we passed the British Nationality Act at the back of that allows foreigners to vote in British elections to this day. Originally, the HMS Windrush was an imperial vessel. And so it brought the empire back to the motherland. And now we're being ruled by the empire.
It's really interesting, like the way that Britain interacted with the Commonwealth. Because I remember, was it 1945 to 1962? Was it where they literally said every single Commonwealth person can vote and can move to America, can move to Britain, can still vote. But prior to that, 1945 to 1962, it was just like open borders for anyone from the Commonwealth, basically. And then I think after that they had more immigration restrictions on the Commonwealth. But still, anyone from the Commonwealth can vote in the British elections.
Yes, and then now, because the yoke of immigration restriction has been lifted, we now have 250,000 Indians coming across every year that can instantly vote in the elections. And it's very curious, the people that
without even getting citizenship, without any process. That's so.
Yeah, it's crazy as well, because the two people that are instrumental in doing this were Home Secretary Priti Patel under Boris Johnson's government. Priti Patel, when she was a student, founded the first Hindutva chapter on a UK university.
Oh my God.
And then when she was in government, she described Indian migrants as living bridges. That's literally Modi's phrase for demographic constituencies in other countries that can leverage advantage back to the market.
I have to say, I've really turned against Modi in the past 6 months. His shit with Russia is so bad, and there is just like there's very little respect for Western countries.
Yeah,
That's how I see it.
because again, Indians are ethno-nepotistic part of the caste system, and so they just seek to leverage their advantage themselves. Also, don't forget, India has like an excess of like 70 million men that they don't want lingering about in their society because it causes discontent. So they're just sort of dispersing them across all countries. Like they could dump a few million of their citizens and still have, you know, hundreds of millions left over. You might have you would know about how they are signing all these bilateral deals, where as part of the bilateral deals, there's a massive immigration. We've got one.
Yeah, so we've got one to show. And it seems to basically be the case that when you sign one of these bilateral deals, you essentially start getting open borders with India.
Yeah. So I was telling the Israelis this because the Israelis are about to sign an Indian partnership, and I was like, you don't want it. Like they will flood your country. They will litter everywhere. They will play things.
I do want to say, look, I've got great Indian friends, and I think in manageable small numbers, assimilation is possible. I think the problem is when you have just basically full open borders.
Well, it depends on cultural proximity. This is my problem, and I don't think so. I've got an Indian friend. He's a very nice guy, and he is actually a very immigration restrictionist. However, exceptions don't prove rules. Otherwise, India wouldn't look like that. And so the best example of how basically assimilation doesn't work is Rishi Sunak. Actually, so Rishi Sunak was born to successful Indian parents. He married an Indian family. His father-in-law is the head of Infosys, who does construction for the Chinese Communist Party, and who only hires Indians in other countries as well. Yeah. He went to private school. He then ascended nepotistically by getting a safest Conservative seat. It was the seat of former Conservative Party leader William Hague, who was the member of the opposition against Tony Blair and just adopted all of Blair's policies. He then immediately went to work for Policy Exchange as well. Policy Exchange is run by Michael Gove, and he wrote a paper while he was at Policy Exchange called The Changing Face of Britain that said, much like Jacinta Price pointed out, we should import more Indian migrants because they're the only diaspora which vote overwhelmingly for the Conservative Party. As soon as he gets into government, having cooed out those trusts, the Indian press celebrate this as, quote, the Indian sun, S-O-N, rises over the empire, and he immediately sets about increasing Indian migration again, just after Priti Patel did it.
It's not good. Look, it's hard. I feel bad for Rishi in some ways because, like, in some ways he is very culturally English. I think because he's got like the sort of Oxford manner about him and everything. But I do think it is very concerning stuff like writing papers about like we should demographically terraform the country.
Well, so I got a tip off recently that I don't think has been printed in the press yet, but the cousin marriage ban is being discussed at the moment in the UK.
And again, this is a good example. There never would have been never would have had to have been a cousin marriage ban without all this. No. It's an important problem. It really is.
So originally, cousin marriage was banned under the first Archbishop of Canterbury and then was ratified in the 12th century by the Catholic Church, and it's never been more than 1% across British society, even after Henry VIII repealed it when he broke from the Catholic Church because he wanted to marry, I think it was his third wife. So he was Britain's first black king. So he went and did that. And then the elite, you had a few instances of it, like Victoria and Albert and Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, they were like second cousins or something. But it was never common among the peasantry, which is why we had a more individualistic, non-clannish,
It is a big part of it.
Yeah, it's all family structure. However, now that we've had like Birradiri clans settling in Bradford and Luton and the like, with cousin marriage rates well above 60%. Now the Conservative Party in opposition have decided to reintroduce a cousin marriage ban, and it's been argued against by the sectarian Islamic MPs in Parliament. It's hilarious.
I didn't see that actually. Yeah. What was even the argument? What is even the possible argument?
It keeps the money in the family and it's a cultural preference. So instead,
is that what they actually said in the House of Commons?
Yeah. There's a clip.
That is so depressing to me that the House of Commons, this august institution of Western civilization, just has now this random foreign guy in it saying we need cousin marriage because it's good.
Like, they will be tired, they will be hungry, they will make a firewood out your beautiful oak door, etc. But the reason I bring this up is because this was presented to Rishi Sunak while he was in government, the cousin marriage ban, and he personally vetoed it.
So bad.
Like he personally crossed it out. Why? And it's because he didn't want to offend his co-ethnics.
So bad. It's so bad. Like, that's just a really sad example where it's just not something that was part of the West, and then it's in culture, like female genital mutilation, honor killings. This just like there are politicians who say, "Oh, these are problems that we need to address with new laws," and it's like there's also why is there this this unexamined assumption that we should have infinite migration where these problems then occur? It's just this unexamined assumption. It's like
as you've already mentioned, the blank slate. They genuinely believe that all differences are arbitrary, that all cultural differences, economic disparities, differences in education.
I know this is true because when I was a leftist, that's how I saw it.
Yeah, and so they just think if you transport them and put them through the passport gates of Heathrow and Gatwick, give them social housing and a few classes on women's consent, they'll be indistinguishable from the native population. And the only thing that is causing these differences is you and me noticing it. which is why they call Charlie Kirk a racist before they murdered him, which is why they're lowering every single Union Jack in my country and saying the communist organization Hope Not Hate partnered up with the former counter-extremism director Sarah Khan, who herself is a second-generation Pakistani Muslim, who was working at the Home Office and doing gaslighting operations for Islamic terror attacks. Last December, they wrote a report on the rising threat of extremism. Islam not mentioned once.
Fucking joke.
Instead, they said that the far right saying things like fighting age males are invading via the channel is preventing a barrier to integration. So they think noticing the problem is preventing the integration.
Oh, there was that amazing article in The Guardian. Let me find that, where that lady in The Guardian said, the guy
Zoe Williams.
Oh, yeah.
I covered it on.
Yeah. I gotta find it.
Yeah.
So she said
the migrants are only committing rapes because you're protesting against.
That was so fucking mental. That was so.
I appreciate that they're this evil because it gives you insight to the deranged liberal mind. And
it
shows
is really
that there are
evil,
some
to be
people you
honest.
just cannot negotiate with. Like
It is really evil. Where's the guy? I'm trying to find this. Zoe Williams. Oh, wait.
No,
there's a couple of them.
it was
I didn't talk about it.
Yeah, I put up as well. If you go to her page on The Guardian.
Oh, how good is this? I'm just going back through my old tweets about The Guardian. So, big shit. Australia has elected its most diverse impact parliament, but the actual article complains it's still not diverse enough. There's a guy called Osman Chu, who's this Chinese Australian leftist, really hardcore like race communist, who's like always great story. Like 5 years ago, he was testifying before the Senate about, I think it was something about foreign interference laws, and there was a conservative senator who just said, will you condemn the CCP? And then he said, how dare you ask me to condemn the CCP just because I'm Chinese? And then it became this big thing on the left, like, how dare, it's so racist, it's so disgusting. And it's like he couldn't even say it, but he was saying it's still not enough. New Face will increase the number of non-European members among all parties to 20. But it's still below 18% of Canada's MPs come from a visible minority, compared with 26% of its population. In the UK, 13%, but compared to 14%. So saying it's still not enough with our population. Beautiful. Thank you, Guardian. It's never enough.
Yeah, because it's all about just advantaging your ethnic in-group. Like it just leverages the weakness of liberalism.
I found it. Beautiful. That was such a mentally large article. Yeah. That is so unhinged.
Yes.
So what is it? The hotel has been at the center of controversy since an asylum seeker was accused of sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl. Pretty fucking bad.
He's now been convicted.
Yeah, convicted. But the concerns can be self-fulfilling. If your accommodation is regularly surrounded by a small hostile mob that sometimes wants to set fire to it, then maybe you have to go out and rape 14-year-old girls.
Yeah, bear in mind, the protest started after the sexual assault.
Oh my god!
So, but she is the face of demented middle-class feminism.
That actually is suicidal empathy.
Yeah,
that is full suicide.
Yeah, she will inflict atrocities on working-class women who can't escape it, and then disappear into an entirely homogenous enclave.
Yes, that's 100%. We've got our version of that in Australia is the Teals. So, have you ever heard about the Teals?
I feel like I have.
It's so mentally ill. I'll show you this. Oh my god, there's so much good stuff I'm going to tell you about Australia.
Do you have an Australian equivalent to Fraser Nelson by any chance?
Fraser Nelson. Which one's Fraser Nelson?
Oh, he's Britain's reverse Kramer. Like, he gets absolutely everything wrong. So, for example...
Oh, is he the guy who's like, he claims to be conservative, is not conservative? Yep. Yeah. We've got a lot of people like that, actually. Fraser Nelson. Yeah, I remember this guy. Yeah, that guy. And he was the one who started the whole thing in January about the grooming game. Because he made a post and said, unlike America, we've got perfect integration.
He said Britain is an integration miracle. And then, my friend Sam Bidwell started a flame war with him, writing a piece in The Critic that said he's basically like what's his name? Hiro Onoda, you know, the guy that was in the Japanese.
Yeah, the last soldier.
The guy that's holed up in the jungle for 4 years. And then that's what ended up, Max Tempers posted that extract from the Oxford grooming game trial, and that's when Musk saw it.
And I saw Max Tempers' thing, and that was a big part of me waking up too, because I started posting about it. Elon even retweeted me on that. And I remember I was fighting with all these leftists at the time, like Lomabox, for example, who's like a British leftist guy. And he was like basically saying, like, no, this is so funny, man, because he's a Jewish British guy who's leftist, and he hates Islamism because these guys want to kill him. But then he was saying, oh no, the grooming gang stuff is just to beat up on Muslims. It's like, dude, what are you talking about? Like these guys hate you, they want to kill you. Like,
if we have a negative character judgment because of the repeated behaviors of a given community, that is the fault of the community, not us for having character judgment. Like,
I've got to find this. So Zali Steagall. So I'll try to explain this to you, right? So 2019, 2022, there was kind of like a revolt inside the Liberal Party
Right.
Where basically the mods all split off and formed the equivalent of like the Lib Dems. So all like a lot of the wets essentially inside the party. Which it's dumb because there still are like heaps of wets in the Liberal Party. Like there'll be a lot of right wingers in Australia who say like the Liberal Party is just still way too wet. But essentially, a big chunk of their main voting base. Where is this? She celebrated the killing of Charlie Kirk. That's what I'm trying to bring up. Zali's still Charlie. So can you imagine like she's basically like a Lib Dem, sort of like a HR type mum,
right?
And she's calling for civil war and killing like Charlie Kirk. And it's like, you guys are not fighting a civil war. What the fuck are you doing? Where is this? I can't find it.
Like social media post.
I had heaps of tweets about it, so I don't know where.
I will say the there we go.
Yeah,
the Twitter search function sucks.
Yeah, it's shit. So she liked this post. Is violence sometimes necessary? Just so mental. And like, here's Zali Steagall. So essentially, they were moderates / people who were really only in the Liberal Party because they believe in, I guess, low tax for rich people.
Right.
But on every other value, they're like socially progressive left wings.
So they're like Lib Dems, basically.
Yeah, literally. And they literally split off and formed their own kind of like Lib Dem movement. And unfortunately, it killed the Liberal Party because they basically bid off about 8 of the heartland seats for the Liberal Party that were historically like the most safe seats for the Liberal Party in the entire country, and that killed the Liberal Party massively. Massive demoralization hit to them, and then there's still this massive internal civil war within the Liberal Party where they're like, should we try and reach out to bring people like this back to our party and win those seats back, or do we go to the right and try and go to the outer suburbs? And Dutton kind of was just, the problem was that Dutton was trying to do both strategies in a way, and it just, you get no one and you just get killed. And it's just funny because these people, they will advocate for literally open borders, infinity migration, but all the teal seats are essentially in the most homogenous parts of Australia.
It's exactly the same as the Lib Dems. Like they're in Oxford, Bath, Cambridge.
Yeah. So like her seat, for example, is literally the wealthiest seat in Australia. It literally covers the area like just north of Sydney Opera House. The eastern suburbs of Sydney are like fully culturally, they're basically like 98% Anglo and then like slightly Jewish as well. Like they're very, very small. It's very low minorities in those seats and very culturally homogenous, very safe, very little crime.
The architecture itself is like Bamalian repellent, basically.
And they advocate open borders, infinity migration, and they're advocating like, let's help the refugees and all this stuff. But then they just dump these refugees in Western Sydney, which is just like really, really quite poor, really quite socially and culturally stratified and segregated. It's actually really interesting. Like the Sydney divide is such a fascinating insight into Australia where you can literally look at this, right? I'll show you this. This is a really funny insight for you. Chicken line. They call it the Al Janus chicken line. The red rooster line. The red rooster. So they call it the. So there's this. Where's the So as you can see, right? Here's Sydney.
Yep.
And the red areas, which they're like teal / Labour, they're like the really wealthy, culturally Anglo areas, I guess. And then the outer western areas are like really culturally stratified, really demographically different. And they call it the Al Jannah chicken line or the red rooster line, where basically there's this like chicken shop of there's this like kind of like Lebanese owned chicken shop chain called Al Jannah Chicken,
right,
where I guess they just sell like shawarmas and stuff like that. And essentially all of the shops, there's literally a line where all the shops are like west of this line in the west of Sydney. There are like basically no shops in the eastern parts of Sydney.
It's like boomer shitlib Gaza Strip, basically.
God, and then all the parts of Sydney that don't have Al Jannah chicken shops are essentially like fully Anglo, really wealthy, but they're all like shitlibs. So they all advocate open borders, infinity migration, but they just don't live near it.
Yeah.
It's just a really, like, it's a fascinating issue.
Demographic NIMBYs.
Yeah, demographic NIMBYs. They are actually massively NIMBYs as well. And I'll show you this as well. This is another really fascinating thing from Sydney. You can actually see as well the top countries of birth by suburb, excluding Australia. So if you exclude Australia and you're just looking at where migrants are coming from, so see these are the tier areas where the top migrant populations are coming from England and South Africa. And then you start going a little bit further west.
It's the same in London.
Yeah, and then as you get really far west, it's like predominantly Vietnamese, Iraqi, Indian, and Chinese, and it becomes really culturally stratified. And then the West is like a lot more, like a lot poorer, and there's a lot more crime, and there's a lot more social tension. And
if you pull up the ONS net migration, ONS census map from the UK,
ONS census,
compare it. So
yeah, let's see this.
So it'll be that one, and there should be a sidebar menu. Identity.
Okay.
Yeah, and it will go ethnic group, and then more categories.
Isn't it funny? We are literally no longer going to categorize people by ethnic group according to our census.
If you do more categories, so there's a little blue thing at the bottom.
Yeah.
And then you scroll down to this should be white British somewhere. White English, Welsh, Scottish, Irish, British. Just tick that one, and then zoom into London.
Wow.
You can see. Yeah. See.
That's fascinating.
So the darker
22%, 28%.
It's the exact same thing. Where they're all on the periphery. 50%. And the center is, it gets way worse. If you zoom into different boroughs, like there are boroughs where it's just 0.
Oh my God. This is, to be honest though, you're lucky that you guys even have this done, because literally the Australian Statistics Bureau is no longer going to even cover ethnicity.
We had to fight to get this out as well. They didn't want to release it. They released it like a year late.
Wow.
But yeah, there are places.
14%.
If you try and find Whitechapel, it's like East London.
Whitechapel?
If you zoom out.
Oh, like Tower Hamlets. Oh, yeah.
If you go, there are areas where there's an 8% one.
Where?
It's around there somewhere.
Holy shit! My God, 12%. I missed the 8% one. There's one nearby. There you go.
There's
literally 8%. That's mental. That's so hardcore. See, we don't have something like this in Australia. We don't have data like that.
Yeah, but if you look at the rest of the country, it's still predominantly. However, this is now like 4 or 5 years old data, and what they've done is
without the Boris wave.
Well, and also without the dispersal of random Somalis, Eritreans, and Afghans into hotels across the country. Like if you go to every town and city now.
Oh, bro! I just found a part of Birmingham that is 2% white English.
Yeah.
Wow.
There you go.
That's shocking. That's an incredible stat.
There's an area
because like realistically, like 60 years ago, it was 99%.
Yeah.
So that is just an incredible amount of demographic change in like just 2 generations.
Yeah, and it was voted against every single time as well. Like
that is crazy.
There was a hilarious article in the Financial Times yesterday that said the truth about migration, and there's a passage.
I saw that.
They were like, well, it's gone from the majority of people in London opposing migration to the majority liking migration. It's like, because there's no English people in London.
Yeah, look at those stats. So it's just stunning, right? See, my God. See, this is what I was gonna say. Like those guys who talk about like, the Jews have done the Great Replacement theory to like I think that stuff's retarded. Like that is like, the Breivik shit. That's full on conspiracy. But the actual just undeniable reality of mass demographic change is a reality.
Yeah,
that is like undeniable.
Well, this is the original theory that Renaud Camus put forward. It was just the blank slate applied to borders, and the natural consequence of applying the blank slate to borders is you treat the entire world as fungible cogs that can slot seamlessly into the market and be elite human capital. But the rest of the world, their civilizational, ethnic, and cultural identity rests on their conscience like a dead hand. And so they will have a very virulent expression of their identity as soon as they mix with yours. And yours is unilaterally disarmed against expressing your own, so it will just be swapped out.
Parts of Liverpool with 6% or 2%.
Yeah, there'll be things like Merseyside.
White English. Wow.
Yeah,
these are like incredible statistics. I wish we had like a map like this for Australia.
There's an area of the Midlands where there's a street where nobody speaks English on it.
Wow, not a single person even speaks English. These are incredible statistics. See, when you look at this, the reality of mass demographic change is undeniable.
Yep.
See, I don't believe the the Jews did it, like Great Replacement stuff. I don't believe that. But like the actual if you just look at the data, has there been mass demographic displacement and change? Yes, that is real.
So when I went to Israel, I think they have cognitive dissonance about it, of where if you point out that, England becoming majority Muslim would be a bad thing, they're like, yeah, it would be, for our security, but it is happening over there, so shrug. So they understand that being the demographic majority, being an unquestionable demographic majority, is the prerequisite to the security of the state, because that's what they practice in Israel. But they also then think with cognitive dissonance that like America is a nation of immigrants.
You know what's really funny? I noticed that heaps of leftists, they view the fact that Israeli Jews want Israeli Jews to be a majority in their own country. They see that as evidence of apartheid.
Yeah, they do. Yeah,
like that's literally
they call it white settler colonialism.
Yeah,
even though they were fighting the British and like bombing the King David Hotel during the War for Independence. So yeah,
I just don't understand like why it's seen as a bad thing to want your own culture to be the majority of your own country.
Because it's a thumb in the eye of the blank slate.
Yeah. I think it is literally the blank slate, because when I was like a leftist, I just regarded anybody even noticing differences as wrong. Like, it's just racist. Like, and I remember I actually have an insight into why leftists ignore shit like the grooming gangs and like the Cologne sexual assault massacres and stuff like that, because I was a leftist. And I remember when I was like 17, 18 years old, and I was actually, when I was like 16, I remember I was like working at my dad's fruit shop, and there was like a guy working there, and he was more conservative, and he was saying to me like, oh, you know, like there's a big problem with like Muslim integration in Europe, and like people are being demographically displaced and all this stuff. And I just remember him going like, just thinking like, nah, this guy's like, no, I'm not even gonna think about this. This is just racist sort of thing. And I remember like the Cologne sex assaults happened, and I remember seeing the headlines, and I was like, oh, that's probably just right-wing propaganda, just not even reading into it.
Yeah.
And it was only when I actually properly sat down and I was like, okay, it's actually undeniable. And then it just kills the blank slate theory.
You have to keep it at a safe distance, otherwise it shatters your worldview.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why these guys ignore it. And I understand that because I was a leftist. I had to ignore all these things when I was a leftist, because if you actually sit down and properly understand that, like, there is a mass systematic problem of grooming gangs, and there's a racial political component to it where they actually see white English girls as less than human.
Yeah.
When you understand that, it's actually undeniable, and you can't even. Well, it kills the world.
You said this on the drive over, and I think a lot of people experience the same thing, including quite a lot of Jews. That October the 7th was a real wake-up call.
Yeah, it was a
not
huge
just
for me.
for the Israelis, but there's like, so Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman, both former Home Office ministers in the Conservative Party, both married to Jewish men/women. And for them, I think that was their real radicalizing moment. They've expressed this before, because they looked out their window, they saw a march outside their parliamentary office, people waving the Palestinian flag and shouting for Hamas, and they thought, oh, they want to kill my family.
Yeah, dude.
So it was an immediate pressing concern to say there are entire enclaves in this country that believe the Ummah matters more than their fellow British citizens, and would like to see the atrocities of October the 7th happen again in my country against me, my family, and my fellow British citizens. So we can't let it.
Yeah, dude, that's how I saw it too. Because the funny thing is, like, people go like, "Oh, Drew's this like pedophile Zionist." I never even cared about Israel Palestine. I never even talked about it. It was just that like I literally stayed away from the issue for years, because I was like, it's just like a poison issue. It's just annoying. Like
it's a war happening halfway around the world between two groups that I do not share the religion, ethnicity, or language with. So it should not enter my politics at all, but it does because of mass migration.
So prior to October 7th, I've got like 130,000 tweets on my timeline over like 7 years or whatever. Prior to October 7th, I think I had 3 or 4 tweets about Israel Palestine. Like, it just was not really an issue that I was like really that I just didn't understand it. Really didn't probably study. And then October 7th happened, and it was because Elon had Twitter and he uncensored everything. So I saw the photos and videos on Twitter where there was just a pile of like grandmas, just a pile of corpses, grandmas at a bus stop in southern Israel, because Hamas had gone past this bus stop, and there were a bunch of elderly people at the bus stop, and they just shot it up. Yeah. And then I saw the piles of young people, like you could literally just see a pile of bodies at the festival that they shot up. And I just saw that, and it was just chilling to me. And then that night, so I was watching it live, literally on Twitter. I remember I was like lying down on the couch. The first video came up of there were a bunch of Hamas guys on the back of a pickup truck, I think near Sderot in southern Israel, and people going, "Oh, there's been an attack." So I remember I was just slowly watching it as it came through. And then that night in Australia, guys in Western Sydney, Muslim guys, let off fireworks. Yeah. And so that was for me. I was like, I can't understand. And
it was the prayer outside Downing Street. Like I was in Japan at the time, so I was on a different time zone. And so I woke up and I saw them all celebrating outside Downing Street.
Yeah, the celebrations. I couldn't see. And one thing that really killed me, dude, and this is something that is just so dark. It's really grim for me. So I'm not sure if you know much about my background, but I started off really with China activism, basically. Like when Hong Kong kicked off, I was protesting with the Hong Kongers and stuff like that. As part of that, like I campaigned a lot with a lot of Uyghur Muslims who were like, because they were brutally persecuted by the Chinese government and stuff like that. So I had a lot of friends in the Uyghur Muslim community. I broke bread with them, had dinners with them. I stayed over at their houses sometimes when I went to Adelaide. Like they were good friends of mine. And I even, when I was a lefty, like I had a small political party in Australia in the 2022 election where it was basically like a party that was mainly anti-CCP, and we're trying to like change the Australian political consensus about trade with China and all this stuff. And we actually had Uyghur candidates. So I had really good friends in this community. And some of my Uyghur friends, and like, I remember I was debating with a conservative guy back in like 2022. He was like, "Oh, Drew, I love your stance on the anti-China stuff. It's very brave. Like, it's good that you're against anti-communism, but you've got like these like race communists in your party." And I was like, "What do you mean?" Like, because one of the Uyghur girls in our party, Adila, when our party got introduced by the ABC News, like, we had an article, and Adila was saying like, "Oh, I believe that we're on stolen land here in Australia, and therefore we should care about indigenous people too." And I just kind of ignored it at the time because it just wasn't really something I was interested in. Like, I just thought like, Adela's like a bit more lefty than me. Like, I guess that if she says that, I guess like, I didn't think
it wasn't a pressing concern.
Yeah. And so this guy was like, I would vote for your party, but you've got like a race communist as your party, as your thing. I was like, what are you talking about? And I was trying to say to him, like, listen, like, I've got friends in the Uyghur community, and they're very moderate. They're fully assimilated. Like, none of them are hardcore. None of them are like Sharia types or anything. They're really chill. And it's true. Like, they were really chill people. But one thing that disturbed me so much and made me so sad, my friends in the Uyghur community that were literally moderates prior to October 7, like, I had a friend, for example, a bloke from the Uyghur community who had a Juris Doctor from the University of Melbourne. He was a really smart, intellectual young guy. And he was like culturally Muslim, but barely, right? He never went to a mosque. Like, never. Like, I think the extent of his Muslim practice was that, like, maybe he didn't drink. Like, he just wasn't religious, right? And he basically had the exact same sort of like cultural worldview as me. Like, we'd read The Economist, discuss the articles every week. Like, just basically both of us were shitlibs. And this guy who was like just an economist reading shitlib, like me, I was that at the time, and never went to the mosque, never really religious, whatever. After October 7, he got all this pressure from within his community, like, unless you are against Israel, you're a race traitor to the Muslims and stuff like that.
It was like a light switch for third worldism.
Yeah. And this guy radicalized. And this guy who went from being like an economist reader who was just like a moderate, never went to mosque, not religious really at all, had heaps of gay friends, like just like a secular, normal guy. Like, I saw a photo of him 9 months later. We had a massive fight, like, hates me now. I saw a photo of him like a year later marching next to a Hezbollah flag in Melbourne.
Yep.
And do you understand how blackpilling and doom appealing that is? Like, to have a moderate Muslim friend who's completely moderate, not religious at all, like, for all intents and purposes, just had the exact same culture as me as an Australian. And then after October 7, he's marching next to a Hezbollah flag. That is so blackpilling and doom appealing for me. And so it's just really sad, man. Like, for me, my whole belief in just like the melting pot, the beautiful world of melting everything, we're all the same. Like, unfortunately, the cultural stuff goes a lot deeper. And this is what was a big thing for me waking up. And it's funny that I see like right wingers. I had a post about anti-whiteism, and I remember I'm a bit more friendly with Carl Benjamin now. I actually like his stuff. I watch those. Yeah. And I watch those things and stuff like that. But I had a post about anti-whiteism in October 7, and I think Carl Benjamin had a go at me where he was like, "It's a shame that you only saw it when the Jews were attacked." But the thing is, so like, listen. My response to Carl is like, "Listen, man. At least I fucking woke up." Right?
Yeah, I'm very much of the opinion that we do not discourage people from coming to the church. You just don't give converts the pulpit on day one.
Yeah.
And so yeah. I don't think being punitive was the right.
Yeah. Look, I think we've had more positive interactions since then, because that was like a year ago.
Yep.
And at that time I was still like quite lefty. It's been a gradual process for me. But essentially, like, the thing that woke me up to basically anti-whiteism being like a real thing, third worldism being a real thing. Because previously, when I was a leftist and I heard people saying, "Oh, you can be racist to white people," I'd be like, "No, they're powerful people in society. You can't be racist to white people." It's like, no. On October 7, these people celebrated a massacre, and then they said, "We want this for Australia. We want this for New Zealand. We want this for Canada. You're white settlers too, and the same thing that happened to the Israelis is what we want to do to you." And there were people that I knew in real life who were doing this, like girls I knew at university who were my friends for years, and I thought they were just normal people. And suddenly they're posting. I remember there was this one girl who posted, "This is what decolonization looks like." And they were a normal person, I thought.
The most famous tweet that came out of it was Somali living in the US.
Yeah.
They said, "What did you think decolonization meant? Vibes, papers, essays."
Yes.
And it's like, oh, okay, you just want us back.
Yeah. So my previous friend Adila, who was a Uyghur, who was like the same girl who had said that thing about stolen land in the ABC, because she ran with my party. I always knew she was a bit more lefty than me, but I just never really thought about it much. On October 7, she literally posted that exact tweet. "This is what decolonization looks like." I was like, "Bruh." So, because my understanding of that is, if this is what decolonization looks like and you want decolonization for Australia, so you want to kill me and my family.
Yes.
Just as simple as that.
I think the Charlie Kirk thing was the same.
Dude, I was about to say that. Charlie Kirk thing is, my parents are conservative. My parents like Charlie Kirk. It's funny because they're Australian, they're not fully conservative. Like they're not as hardcore on abortion stuff and gun stuff, but just in general, they like the conservative values of Charlie Kirk. And then Charlie Kirk gets killed, and I see all these like former leftist friends of mine celebrating. My understanding is you want to kill my parents too.
Yeah.
So this is just like the long road of me waking up.
So my wife, default lib when I met her, went to university in Bristol, which is like Britain's Portland. I don't know what the analog is in Australia, but
Melbourne maybe.
Something like that. So then she met me, and like first date, she was like, "Oh, maybe we should use the pronouns," and now she's like, deport literally every last one of them, including the English people we don't like. So she's proper hardcore. She's a bit like Erica and Charlie's dynamic, actually.
Right.
And so what really chilled her, because I met Charlie in May. He was over in the UK.
You actually met him? Wow.
He's a really lovely guy.
That's so
chilling. He was over for the Oxford and Cambridge tour.
Yeah.
Where inevitably he gets insulted by the incumbent member of the race committee of Oxford Union.
And the guy who's now the president of the union, who celebrated his death.
Yeah, he should not just be stripped of his title. He should be banished from university and asked, which country would you like to live in instead, and exiled.
Because he hates white British people.
Exactly. Yeah. He said institutions that do not oppose systemic racism are a cancer that should be opposed by any means necessary. So it means
including violence.
Yeah, exactly. We want to kill you. Yeah. So she was not as deeply affected by it on day one as I was, and all the rest of my guy friends were, because we were like, right, he was one of us. Some of us met him, and it could be any one of us next.
Yeah.
What she was really affected by was the response, because she was still like lurking in a Discord server where a bunch of people that she didn't talk to anymore were celebrating it. She was like, if this happened to you, they would be telling me it was justified.
Yeah, exactly.
And similar position. So she has like cut all ties with these total freaks.
Dude, see, that for me, Charlie Kirk was literally the final nail in the coffin. Because like, my understanding is like, you actually saw this a little bit with, there were some liberal political commentators like that Dean Withers guy who actually had a more human response, and Cenk Uygur and stuff like that. And I think it's because they realized, like, listen, we're political commentators, we also get death threats. It becomes more real for them.
Yep.
And that was a big part of it for me. Like, I've literally had death threats for years, mainly starting from like China stuff. Now I get more from Islamic extremists and stuff like that. I had death threats for years. And like, it's very clear to me that the same people who did this to Charlie Kirk, they would want me dead. And they'd all celebrate as well. And just this thing, it's just suicide. If you love life and you're a life-affirming individual, why would you march next to people who want to kill you?
Well, this is my frustration with the sort of emerging third worldist right. So I put when I went to Israel on that trip, and the hilarious thing is most of the time I was arguing with members of Knesset, like, why do you want to send Palestinians to my living room? So I was actually doing politics that maybe they would want, but there you go. I don't trust them to read. Because they have such a preoccupation with Israel, I think it's more of an American phenomenon, because
they're like Voipa JQ type people.
Yeah. There seems to be a willingness to make co-belligerents out of Islam, and they're going to fall for the same.
Oh, that shit is so retarded.
Yeah, well, they're going to fall for the same problem that like the Green Party in the UK, of where they become a Trojan horse for Islamic interests without necessarily realizing it. These people are not just fair weather allies. They are using you as useful idiots because they have a strong sense, an imperial mission, a strong sense of religious purpose, and they will roll you over the moment that you have both mutually destroyed.
The Islamic Left Alliance is one of the most suicidal things I've ever seen in history. And it's so funny because they literally did that in the Iranian Revolution. They literally were allied with the leftists in the Iranian Revolution to overthrow the Shah. And as soon as they got in, like the Khomeini regime literally just like slaughtered them all en masse. And literally tens of thousands were executed. The guy Raisi who died in the helicopter crash like a year ago or whatever? He was actually called like the Butcher of Tehran because he was literally the guy who presided over the death penalty being applied to like 20,000 leftists.
Right.
So, and then there were leftists. It's so funny. There were leftists who were like mourning, like Raisi's been killed. It's so sad. It's like, dude, he killed 20,000 of you. Let's just don't understand. It's so suicidal.
This is why I think it's also a uniquely American preoccupation as well. The sort of the tint towards third worldism and the treatment of Hamas as
so much.
Just another group fighting for national determination. Is that I think the Brits have a frame of reference, because the British right don't really fall into this. The Brits have a frame of reference where they go, no, we have a long history of being an independent and powerful nation. If we're going by right of conquest, the British Empire did this. So we don't need to fall back on third worldist doctrines or resurrecting the Third Reich in order to rescue our civilization.
This is true. I don't really see like British right-wing dissidents going into the whole Russia shit.
No,
I don't really see that.
No. You get a bit of juiceburging.
Yeah, a little bit,
And I think mainly that's driven by the influence of liberal Jews over British politics. So we've had like Barbara Roach, who was Blair's immigration minister, used the nation of immigrants phrase for Britain Doesn't make any sense.
Look, my response to that is that there are retarded leftists in every community. Like there are Greek communists in Australia who came out from Greece. Their families were part of the communist side in the Civil War, and like the head of the Asylum Resource Centre in Australia, I'll literally get him up on the stream. Con K Asylum. This guy, Con Kara. I don't even know how to pronounce his last name. Follows me. Con Kara Panagiotis. Like he's a full race communist. And he's like from the communist side of the Greek Civil War.
He looks a little bit Somalian.
Yeah, a little bit. Like so, there are some Greeks who see themselves as third worlders, right? Like I think, he's like a massive. Let's have a treaty with Aboriginal people. Meet Abbas after 12 years of waiting. Abbas has finally found safety, but too many others still do. Like he's complaining.
What is his family background? Because
he's Greek. He's Greek.
Fully Greek.
No, I'm not sure he's fully.
There we go. It's got a bit blank slate in there.
But I'm not sure if he's fully Greek. But there certainly are some Greeks who are like fully third worlders in orientation. And I've seen this, right? There's a guy on Twitter that I'm kind of friendly with because he is Cypriot and everything. He lives in London, and he basically always attacks the more Greek conservative people who say like, let's reconquer Constantinople, and just says like, no, we should like be friends with the Turks, and like we should find ourselves in the East. Like there are some Greeks who, for some reason, are like we should find ourselves in the East.
No, I think the Greeks are far more aligned with Rome and the Hellenists than they are.
Yeah, but the Greek leftist tradition hates that.
Yeah.
So there was a guy.
Yeah, but that's because the Hellenistic tradition is to do with excellence and upward mobility, and like these people are freaks.
Yeah,
like they're
mobilizing against this is such a good story. You have to know about this one. So there were about 300 guys in immigration detention in Australia, where these guys were literal pedophiles, like killers. Because we do have a strict policy where if a migrant comes to the country and then commits a heinous crime, we literally just denatch. Yep. We deport. If they've got dual citizenship, we deport. So that actually is one good thing that Australia does. But these guys, the courts have found that they couldn't be deported because they were like refugees, or they would be at risk if they were deported back to their home country. One amazing example was there was a guy from Malaysia who literally lit a woman on fire in a terrible murder, like literally like burned a woman alive. And then they were saying, "Oh, you can't send him back to Malaysia because you'd get the death penalty in Malaysia." I don't give a fuck. Send him back to Malaysia.
Same thing happened with like a Pakistani paedophile over in the UK.
Yeah.
So they said one of them was an alcoholic. He would be mistreated because he was an alcoholic if he went back to Pakistan.
Oh my god.
The other one was it would be unfair and cruel for his own children if this Pakistani paedophile was deported back to Pakistan because he wouldn't get to see it.
Fucking mental. So what this is all about, right? Con's thing about the brutal deportation bill. Those 300 guys, they were basically being held in indefinite immigration detention. Because the government ruled we can't send them back, but we also can't release them to the community because like half of these guys are like literal child sex offenders, rapists. Like they were like really high risk individuals. And then the High Court of Australia found that you can't keep these guys in indefinite detention because that is like I don't even know what it was. It was just like bad and unusual punishment. Yeah, something like that. So then these guys had to be released onto the streets, and so within like 2 weeks of them being released to the street, there were multiple rapes from this cohort of 300 individuals. Yep. Eventually, the Labor government passed emergency legislation to try and put these guys back into immigration detention, overruled the High Court, put them back into immigration detention and deport them. And what they did is they eventually signed an agreement with Nauru, which is like a small island nation. They're going to send them like a $1.5 billion and just send these 300 guys to Nauru. And Con is going, no, this is so unfair. They're brutally being deported. And they're literal pedophiles. They're literal like child execute, like the worst of the worst. It's fucking amazing.
The universal human rights doctrine is again premised on the blank slate. So it always treats the criminals as the victim society rather than the other way around. It's the same thing with Iriana, the Ukrainian refugee who was stabbed to death by the like 15-time black skin. And it's like Van Jones, shortly before Charlie Kirk's death, accused Charlie Kirk of race baiting, and he said, "This man was hurting, so he hurt." And it's like, no, this man is ontologically evil and a danger to the public, and could be locked up in a El Salvador-style prison forever. Yeah, forever.
This is the thing. This is once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. It's like crime, terrorism. Anything that's like deviant against civilization, they just love for some reason. Like the criminal is the victim of society. The terrorist who literally carries out like a fucking mass murder of kids, he must be a victim of society. Van Jones on CNN, when that poor girl Erna was killed, he was like, oh, let me get that one up. That was so fucking good. When Van Jones was like, hurt people. Yeah. I don't give a fuck if he was hurting. Yeah. You can't stab somebody to death, right? Oh, that was so sick, that one. Where was it? I've got to find it where Van Jones.
There it is.
Yeah, where he goes.
We don't know how to deal.
With. We don't know what he was hurting.
Also, like there's no evidence to say there's anti-white attack. Literally, the CCTV came out where he said, "I got that white girl multiple times."
Oh, I know. Isn't that grim that they were actually attacking Charlie Kirk one day before he died about this? Wow.
And then Kirk reached out to Van actually privately to set up a debate, and Van said he never responded.
Van wasn't going to respond.
He didn't respond to Charlie's text
until
it was too late. Yeah, so that he went on TV the other day, and he looked remorseful. But the thing is, like, sorry, Van Jones has spent the last 10 years pouring this Radio Rwanda rhetoric out.
Yeah,
he said the election of Donald Trump was an expression of white male rage.
Yeah, it is Radio Rwanda.
Like, so you can't pour out basically genocidal rhetoric against your political opponents and then claim remorse when one of them inevitably gets killed. Like, Trump was already shot. You should have toned it down then. That should have been your moment of reflection. It wasn't, and this rhetoric, this climate where you've weaponize like delusional freaks in your base with nothing to lose because they're addicted to furry porn or they've castrated themselves. This is your guys' fault. Like, this was always going to happen.
Oh man, it's so mentally. Can you tell us more about this blank slate theory? Like explain the mindset of someone like Ben Jones a bit more.
Okay, so I will.
Because I think it is actually really accurate.
Reading recommendation for people, Emily Finley's Ideology of Democratism. It goes through various philosophies that led up to this, but basically they believe that
I'm going to look that up.
It's a great book. It was Oxford University Press. So they believe, and this is the cornerstone of all Enlightenment anthropology. It's shared by communism and liberalism alike, that all human beings are born free and equal, perfectly free and perfectly equal. That's in Locke. Locke obviously believed that we were in a hierarchy of beings, so that we were below God and the angels, but because of the mechanistic universe set in motion by materialism, the scientific revolution, and liberalism, you take deities out of the equation. Man is at the top of the hierarchy. There's nothing above him, and then all men are equal in that category. So they believe that all mankind was equal at one point, whether it's on Pangea, whether it's our respective countries, whatever the fuck, right? And so it's only through culture, economic disparities, the hidden hand of oppression that stops us being free and equal. So any barrier to freedom and equality must be removed by a state that has used its rational faculties to arrive at the endpoint of philosophy, which is liberalism. And because every human being has equal rational faculties, liberalism presumes itself to be the supreme philosophy. So anyone that disagrees with liberalism is actually against human nature and democracy. So they can, for noticing differences, for spreading populism or racism or whatever, censor you, suppress you, and shoot you.
Yeah.
And so this is where you get political violence out of the liberal tradition. And this is where you constantly get the Marxists nipping at the heels of liberals in nations, saying, you haven't fulfilled the promise of liberalism yet, because not everyone is free and not everyone is equal.
Yeah, this is actually where I became really disillusioned with liberalism, because I realized that like I was always anti-communist, I was always against the tankies and stuff like that. But what really black-pilled me and blue-pilled me was the fact that there were so many liberals who were willing to be fellow travelers with the communists. And so one of the things that just doom-pilled me so much was like Ezra Klein, who was someone I quite liked. I like the general vision of abundance. Although you might have seen it, I've got the iteration of it called dark abundance, where you have public transport, but you just basically death penalty anybody who does what. So Japan. Japan. Yeah, just Japan, exactly. But and I call it dark abundance. But I quite liked Ezra Klein. After Zoran got elected, he was like, "Oh, you know what? Zoran actually has some good ideas. We can work with him." And it's because he's ultimately got all these leftist friends that he still wants to be friends with. And so the liberals just can't do a firewall between them and the socialists.
Yeah,
I think that's my biggest problem with the liberals. Like, they are not willing to punch left. They're not willing to say there's a massive firewall between us and the like literal race communists, and we will never accept, because unfortunately they're just too much blank slates. I literally had this debate with Wick yesterday where he was so outraged that I was saying like Ilhan Omar is not like a patriot American.
Okay, the reason they're so outraged is because if you acknowledge ethnic or biological hard limits on people's ability to adopt certain philosophies, that destroys the liberal project. For example, and there's a great book on this, Alan McFarlane's The Origins of English Individualism. It charts the origins of liberalism from English family structure, property, common law, and like geography. And so it means that if you have an individualistic family structure where you're not marrying your cousin, your property ownership is not directly transferred down to the family and clan, so that incentivizes your sibling, the children and the siblings, to go off to different parts of the country, form new farmsteads, and therefore nuclearize their families. You get more individualistic thinking. You get a higher trust culture. You get an extension of moral consideration out beyond the immediate family. If you are in a country where your religion and your clannish tribal structure convinces you to marry your siblings and your cousins, literally your siblings in Ilhan Omar's case, then you only consider your family, your clan, and the Ummah as worthy of moral consideration. And so you will lie, cheat, and steal as long as it advances you, your family, your clan, and your Ummah. So you cannot have a high trust individualistic culture with people that practice cousin marriage at those rates. It's literally impossible. There's a hard ceiling on their intelligence and their moral consideration for other people, and that's why they can't slot seamlessly into Anglo societies.
This is what I want to ask you, right? Do you think there's any salvaging of parts of liberalism? Because that book you mentioned, the origins of English individualism, and when you look at it, right, this is something that has developed over hundreds of years, thousands. It is part of the Anglo culture. It is part of the traditions of your country, and it's actually something I really quite admire. And when I was actually attacking Trump, I was kind of saying like, well, the problem was that it was actually kind of going away from the Anglo individualistic traditions, that type of society towards a more third worldist, like right-wing cordialismo type approach. Where I've now diverged is I realize that Trumpism is like an emergency response to the fact that you can't really have an Anglo individualistic society when the population is basically.
He's the Caesar lever.
What I was going to say though, right, is if you could rebuild a more socially cohesive society, if you could have a much more coherent national identity and stuff like that, could you have like a liberalism in one country? You know how like Stalin has socialism in one country. Could you have like a national liberalism type thing where, like, you know, like the kind of, because I do like, not to extreme levels, but like the Anglo individualistic tradition that's sometimes cunningly dropped, but like sort of like last out, where it's like liberalism for 130 IQ plus Anglos. I admire that, right, to a certain extent. Not to a retarded extent, not to like drag queen story time retarded extent, but just being able to like, not the fact that it's non-clannish, right? I like that a lot. There's a big difference between, say, like Western culture and Pakistani migrant culture in Britain. And I pointed this out when the guy turned in his own son who killed Charlie Kirk.
Yep. Knowing
Knowing his son might face the death penalty, he turned in his own son because this guy is a high trust member of society, and he is not going to basically be cleansed. Compare that to how, say, the Pakistani migrant community in Britain kept all those migrant rapists, they protected them.
There's a quote from the head of the Ramadan Foundation in 2016 when he wrote in the Daily Mail when 3 of his cousins were convicted. And he broke ranks and said, the Pakistani community has buried its head in the sand over the grooming gangs issue because they don't want to be seen as siding with the white enemy.
See, this is what I'm trying to, if you get what I mean, right? Like, I see the fact that English Anglo culture is non-clannish. I think that's a really beautiful, admirable part of that culture. And I think to some extent, the individualistic, classical liberal element should be retained. Can it be done so? Can some of it be salvaged if we can get rid of like the failing ideology of multiculturalism and like race comments and stuff like that, and if we had a more cohesive society and stuff like that, could we have some level of liberalism salvaged?
Well, you need to abandon the bullshit blank slate anthropology that underlies liberalism and turns it into an ideology, because it needs to be a set of practices and customs rather than an ideology.
I
think they turned it into an ideology. Well, so for 2 reasons. Number one, they wanted to prevent religious, so Christian faction wars in the UK, and then they wanted to export it around the world via the British Empire. This is why Britain itself is now being ruled by the sons and daughters of empire, because they exported liberalism as a doctrine out to India. They ruled India like it was a liberal country, which then meant that when the Indians came back, they inflicted liberalism on the UK and became liberal rulers. But then they infused it with clannish nepotism. So what you need to do is, one, allow the organic political structures of each people to play out
over many generations.
Because that is going to be the natural character of peoples. Like, I don't think you're probably going to have liberalism in the Saudi kingdoms, for example.
I think really.
And that's why also the natural character of the English is why we can have a king, and we should always have a king, but the king is constrained by the rules that he enforces on his kingdom. This is like present in the Robin Hood myths, where, you know, the king, if he misses a shot, Robin Hood will rap him over the back of the head without fear of consequence. Or Magna Carta was automatically intuitive to the English. It's why it fed into the Bill of Rights, even before liberalism was a thing. So you can have the elements of not neutral institutions, but institutions that work for the loyalty of the nation rather than accruing resources nepotistically to the people that inhabit them. You can have common law. You can. It doesn't work like Christianity, I will say. But you can have the English form of Christianity. You can have non-clannish, non-tribal family structures. You can have that, but I think
it arises out of custom and tradition and over generations.
You might be able to export those customs and traditions, but you don't import the people to then have them practice your customs and traditions in your country, because they're just going to recreate the third world in their country. You kind of leave them alone in their own cultural petri dish for a few hundred years and come back and check on them. See if it's worked.
It's interesting because I was listening on the way to picking you up this morning. I was listening to your video on how the third world thinks, and you were talking about how like a huge part of it, like the predominance of like kinship, clan-based ties and stuff like that. It is a part of it is like over 1,000 years. There's a much higher predominance of like cousin marriage and so when you look at it, right, like it's almost like English individualism is literally a 1,000-year process, and I think
longer than that, because Tacitus observed in the Germanic tribes that then migrated over into England and mixed with the native English Britons and the Celts. He observed that they had the early inklings of common law, and they consulted their womenfolk on the matters of importance to the tribe. So it was almost like the ethnic custom of the Germans that was then brought over to the Britons and melded with it. So it's been like 2,000 to 3,000 years.
Do you know this? Do you know this MAGA influencer in?
I don't, but I'm already guessing it's going to be Slob.
Do you know? Do you know the MAGA influencer of fucking Oswald? That's funny. Oswald. Have you ever talked to Oswald?
I have not. I'm guessing he's a Hellenist.
He was part of the Drew Pavlik Democratic Alliance in 2022 before he was like really right wing. He joined my party and went to some of the Hong Kong protests, which is very funny. Before he became like really hardcore with all this stuff.
I will bring up the Hong Kongers as well because
they have a great culture.
It was living proof that not all immigrants are equal. Because if you notice how we took in 100,000 Hong Kong refugees.
No one noticed.
And there's no Hong Kong grooming gangs. Like I hope they regain sovereignty over their homeland and they can go home because they actually want to.
Look, Hong Kong
haven't caused trouble.
Hong Kong is a really good migrant group, to be honest. And I think part of it is because the British were over Hong Kong for like 200 years, the cultural liberalism in that culture is very much ingrained. I can't find the person, but it's basically like there's this like MAGA Latina woman, and she has a pretty thick like Hispanic accent. And she was speaking at Tommy Robinson's rally, and she was screaming like, "We're all with Islam and stuff like that, and we must fight a war and stuff like that." And she's posted photos of like, "This is what we want to do to illegal migrants." And there's like a photo of like a guy strapped to a chair, and she's got like a gun shooting the.
Yeah, that's dumb.
And so what I was trying to say, right, is like, I guess my problem with parts of MAGA, and it was kind of going back to that cuddly drug for me, where it's like, I don't like the kind of like slopulist, cordialismo aspect.
I'm glad you're using the term slopulist as well. I thought I was the only person.
It's a great term, but like, do you get what I mean? Like, I wish that you could have the more sort of like genteel Anglo-conservative liberal tradition where it's like, like the nice WASP culture and stuff. I just have a more instinctive appreciation for that. I think some of the aspects of MAGA can be crude, but I do understand that it's kind of like an emergency response to like the fact that like America has been kind of disintegrating in the past 10, 15 years.
I think you get that, but I think it follows in the wake of Trumpism. I think if Vance takes over, you're not going to get the sort of third world slopulist.
Yeah, he's more an intellectual guy.
He's a post-liberal Catholic.
Yeah.
You're going to get Stephen Miller, who is incredibly competent Christian convert Jew.
He's not Christian.
I think Stephen Miller's
Christian. Oh, right, okay, yeah, I didn't know.
Because I don't think he's a practicing Jew. I think he's ethnically Jewish. But
he's ethnically Jewish.
And then you're going to get other members of the administration like Tom Homan, who's like literally a wasp chewing a bulldog.
Valentina Gomez, that's
that one, the one that flamethrower the Quran. And
see, I don't like. See, the thing is, like,
I find it cringe. See, you're just attention seeking.
Because the thing is, like, I'm very hostile to like Islamism and stuff like that. But I do like. I look at someone flamethrowing the Quran. I'm like, that's also not like. Flamethrowing the Quran is like not something that like a genteel Anglo.
Yes, and also like Ayaan Hirsi Ali founded Courage Media. She's a lovely woman.
Yeah,
the fact that she's got lifelong security for just speaking truth about Islam and the aftermath of 9/11.
Yeah,
that kind of makes like a laugh and a mockery out of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I'm glad you're in America where there's.
I think this is the one that I was talking about, and I'm like, I don't quite like this. Like, I would prefer like Rupert Lowe is a gentleman. He's like Rupert Lowe is a gentleman. He can speak. He's articulate.
Yes.
I don't necessarily want people with black bags over their head.
No,
this is like Latin American.
Yeah,
it's
a helicopter ride solution that's not necessary. Yeah.
I don't like that stuff. But
No. I think it reduces the tone of the movement. But I'm glad that they're living in a country where they are armed. They have a relatively low Muslim population dispersed throughout the country. Of course, you've got Dibble, Michigan, and little Mogadishu, and they need to.
They don't have the same problems as Britain when it comes to like MENA immigration.
Yes, yeah, they eventually will if they don't change things. However, I'm glad that they are not under the death threats that like Salman Rushdie or Ayaan are. However, if you're gonna then do that, maybe I'm just far too sensitive, but it kind of devalues the threat level that
I think you're right.
Europe and the UK are.
See, this is the thing. Like, if it's slopulism be gay race communist, that's a really bad future that I don't like.
Which way, Western?
I know that's kind of depressing to me. Look, I like the idea that like you can keep the nice Anglo individualistic strain and stuff like that, so long as it's like something that comes organically through the culture rather than impose on people the blank slate vision.
And also, the reason you do that and the reason you resist the march of slopolism through your movement is you have to basically be autistic enough to say no to the monetary incentives. Because I think a lot of the stuff we were talking about earlier with the right-wing third worldism is because so much of the third world was brought online in 2024.
Yeah, very true.
But now the monetary incentives, especially with like Twitter monetization, and YouTube, is to go, Pakistanis and Saudis and Indians are like have these various ethnic grievances. If I play into those, I'll go semi-viral.
Sadly, yes.
You just have to turn around and go, well, rather than allow my content to be dictated by the algorithm, you just chase things that are interesting to you and you build up credibility. And that is the model of leadership. This is why, as you said, Rupert Lowe has got a lot of credibility because despite being ousted from Reform, it was over principled reasons, and he has rather than like slunk off with his tail between his legs, he's saying, no, I'm going to say things that are unpopular, the Westminster media bubble, but they're very popular with the public, and minesweep the political field to ensure that whoever follows me in my wake can carry out these policies that need to be done without so much reputation blowback. And I think that's very admirable. And I think that's the way that we do things going forward. That's what won Trump's mandate, and that's what the very competent people in the Trump administration are doing. It's not what the like influencer hangers-on are doing. But they'll never govern. They're not serious people.
This is true. I think Richard Hanania has gone really cringe recently, but he does
recently.
But I think he does have a point that the right wing needs to cultivate elite human capital more.
That is true.
Yeah.
However,
but he doesn't in the
his definition of elite human capital is Ayala.
Which is not right.
It's literally a demon. Like, no thank you. Like, I'm sorry, but like, Richard, if we're going off elite human capital, let's not play the game of physiology.
I think the problem is that Richard conceives of elite human capital as basically being a gay race communist. And this is a problem because gay race communism is not conducive to elite human capital at all, because eventually you get slaughtered by like a guy with a 50 IQ holding a machete.
That plus the entire part of the gay part of the constituency is not just, homosexuality. It is lifestyles that are not propagating your civilization, your genetics, or they're deleterious. So they're worshipping the kind of women who are on SSRIs, birth control, various placebo medications, have that, the single crutch that they walk along because they're on disability for some vague illness that they self-diagnose. Like, none of these people are mentally or genetically healthy. And you don't want that. You can have a normal civilization, guys. You can just get married, you can be physically fit, you can eat steak, and you can die with your loved one's hands in yours. You can just do those things.
That's a nice thing. Okay, as this sort of like final summing up, let's talk about this, right? One thing I do like about the young Israelis is that they tend to not be self-hating. They tend to like be life-affirming. They tend to actually like, they have children, they have families, they live life. Like in the West, so many young people are like just basically self-hating. They don't want to have children. They don't want to have families. And just like the normal way that human beings have derived meaning for like thousands of years, which is like literally like community, family, literally dying with your loved one's hand in yours. Like they are just so hostile to that. And so how do we stop people in the young white leftists from hating themselves and falling into gay race communism and all this stuff? What is the path forward to like reviving the culture? Because I think it is a huge part of it. It has to be the culture.
So there's two elements to that. So the reason the Israelis have success, despite having high GDP per capita and military service, is because there is a cultural premium placed on families.
Yes.
So I think it was Ben Gurion who said he was giving out medals to women who had like 4 or more kids to replenish the population of the course, because they said they were surrounded on all sides, and so we need to keep demographics up to ensure the cultural security of our country. That's a good idea. It's the same in Georgia, right? If you have, I think it's a certain number of kids, you'll get visited by the Archbishop, and because they're a strongly Christian country, there's a strong incentive to do that. You can't do it just by purely redistributive or technological incentives. It's not sustainable. You're trying to reverse engineer your civilization with the exact same tools that have had a top-down pressure on you not having families. Having to rationally plan your family alongside other things like house buying or economic considerations means that you can never rationally justify it because it's always a net detriment. So you can't do that. It needs to be cultural. And actually, I think the way to win over, so there's 3 camps. There's cultural conservatives, traditionalists, people that are going along with the religious revival like me. I think there are actually quite a few people like you who are former default libs, who have realize the atrocities on their own side, and who have been won over by the persuasive arguments and civil discourse.
Yes.
This is what Charlie was really powerful at.
Yeah.
Like the amount of people who were long-lasting converts to conservative politics because he first converted them in their personal lives.
Yeah.
Because he compassionately said, look, I can tell that you're coming up to me because you're speaking to me from a place of pain right now. I don't pretend to know about your life, or whatever you're struggling with. I'll pray for you. God bless you. Work through it. I really want you to have the family and the kids that you want.
Yeah.
He went into like the whatever podcast, like Den of Sin, with no one and he won over a lot of the OnlyFans girls. And that's the way you can do that.
That's actually amazing, to be honest. That is like literally like basically a miracle.
Yeah, and
he's actually doing the Christian faith. Like that's
exactly. There's a third category, which is demented gay race communists that will only double down on being genetic cul-de-sacs, and so you cannot win over, and who will try to kill you. Those people belong in an insane asylum for the rest of their life. We need to build lots more asylums. We need to lock them away. Maybe if we unhook them from like the hormones they're taking, the psychoactive meds, and the ideology, maybe they might be able to reintegrate back into society and have some sort of productive, fulfilling life at some point. Some of them will never, and so we can't convince those people.
The doom and pill is, it took me like 5 years to work it out. Like it's a really long process, I think, for people who are like marinated in the ideology.
Yeah, and there's some people that will never have an off ramp, but there's some people that will. And so all we can do is speak frankly, speak persuasively, be compassionate about that. And then the people who are not open to civil dialogue, who genuinely want us dead, we just lock them away.
I think I saw someone say this somewhere, but it was actually a pretty good idea. Like pay people like a UBI not to vote. And you would probably
or just don't give them. Oh, yeah, but you're thinking like an Australian where voting is compulsory. I would say one vote, one household, and it's to do with marriage and property ownership.
Maybe, or just simply like if you are somebody who is like a net negative taxpayer, like you don't vote. Yeah. That's if you're taking more out of the system. Although by saying that, I've probably destroyed any chance I have a political career. But I don't know. Like. I don't know. We've got to find some way because
man, don't underestimate how quickly the Everton window is moving towards common sense.
I think it's just look. I love voting, of course, but it's just like how do you?
Nobody votes harder than I do.
But it's like how do you like accommodate the fact that like there's a portion of the population that like are voting for national suicide? I don't understand it, and I think despite the fact that I don't like a lot of the aesthetics or necessarily the methods of MAGA and stuff like that. I think I understand that like it is basically like almost like an emergency response to the fact that like there's a significant portion of America that is like nationally suicidal.
Yeah. So MAGA could either be seen as the Kali Yuga or the zenith of populism. Like it could be seen as like peak democracy or like the lowest possible point of democracy because it's such a broad coalition and it's so incoherent that it's going to come undone. But I think 2024 has hopefully shown that it is like peak populism. Because you know the Aristotelian conception of where there are three forms of government and there are technically six because they're divided by virtue.
Yeah.
Like MAGA, I think, is on the virtuous side of democracy rather than mob rule. I think like Zoran Mandami is mob rule, where you just replace the entire population and you get like third world sloppiness.
That's true, but I do think that there are unfortunately some wings of MAGA that
there are elements. Yeah. And this is powered on by social media. But I think that no matter what, democracy itself is inherently unstable and will collapse into a sort of Caesar figure. And it's whether or not you get a despotic evil Caesar figure like a Mandani or a Stalin or a Mao, or you get a virtuous Caesar figure like a Cincinnati.
Zoran was a massive waking up thing for me because like he is like just literally a communist, like a literal race communist. And then like there were just like half the Democrats who were like, oh, we have to vote blue no matter who. And I'm like, I'm sorry, like if that includes Zoran, like it's fully over.
Yep,
it's fully over.
And he's likely to win as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That was great discussion. Thank you so much. And I'm going to take you back to CPAC now. You've got a great. I'm gonna get banned from the country. Probably gonna get. You told me a little bit about what you're going to say, so I'm really interested to hear it. I'm going to probably buy a ticket and try to go and actually watch your series.
Yes, sweet man.
So yeah. Thank you, man. Great talking, and we'll have to keep talking. Yeah,
definitely.
Cheers. Thanks everyone for watching.
Cool. That was really good fun.